All right, so here's how this is going to work. I'm going to just talk about the list of things that you're going to want to do for your plot breakdown. Remember, it is event, disturbance, point of attack, conflict, crisis, complication, dark moment, enlightenment, climax, and the denouement. Event is the first one, and that is at the beginning of your story. This is what is establishing what the world is about. This is usually what is going on before any action starts to kick in. So it's usually a calm moment in the story, a calm moment in the movie or the TV show or the play where nothing has really happened yet in terms of action wise, but the play has gone on. This is usually when characters are being introduced. We're getting to understand what the environment is. What kind of world are we about to get into? So that's the event. The next one is disturbance. Disturbance is when something weird or different happens. So the world is being introduced as calm, right? Thinking about it like that. So the world is calm or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be calm because you can maybe start off with an action sequence, but the world has been established and then something has to come up to disrupt the world. There's something that has to shake it up. And sometimes when you're thinking about like those nature movies or those natural disaster movies, so like Andreas or volcanoes erupting movies. So you establish the world is calm, but then there's an explosion or something that's like, oh man, what's going to happen? That's called the disturbance. After the disturbance comes the POA. The POA is the point of attack. This is it needs to just be one sentence. And remember, it has to be from the protagonist's point of view. You don't need two different points of attack. The point of attack is going to be from one protagonist. The protagonist is the one that makes the point of attack, and you need the word decision in your sentence. So the point of attack is going to be a decision that is made by the protagonist. Now you have to figure out who the protagonist is. At the end of this, I'll tell you how to distinguish between the protagonist and the antagonist. But the protagonist makes the decision on what they're going to do about the disturbance. So something has disturbed, something has been a disruption, and the protagonist is going to make a decision on that. So a sentence would be, Jack decides to hunt down the killer. And this is where a lot of people are getting it wrong. Decision or decides needs to be in your sentence. Tommy decides to go on an adventure, whatever what is. But that protagonist needs to decide something based on the disturbance that was given. Then the conflict is given, and the conflict is going to be this is so short. It's something versus something. So it could be man versus man. It could be man versus nature. It can be man versus God, or it can be man versus themselves. So it could be me versus me. If the problem is something like psychological inside of me, it could be me versus a student. Right? So if I'm battling against another student, me versus student. It can be me versus nature. So maybe it's cold outside and I don't want to go outside. So it's me versus nature. All right. So that's the conflict. That's all you need is man versus whatever the state of conflict is in your story. Then you have the crisis. Crisis, and let me talk about that. Crisis and complication, they go hand in hand, but they are different. Crisis is when something is going to happen, is something bad is happening on purpose to the protagonist. And complication is when something bad happens by accident to the protagonist. So here's how I would illustrate that. let's say the protagonist is robbing a bank. So the protagonist is robbing the bank and they're getting in their getaway car. If the police start to chase them down and start shooting at them, they are in crisis. So the robbers are trying to get away, and then they're the protagonist, and the cops are chasing them. So they are now in crisis because the cops, on purpose, they are consciously trying to stop the bank robbers. That's important. You got to get that part. It's the protagonist is on purpose, consciously trying to stop the protagonist. That's a crisis. A complication is when it's not done on purpose. So the bank robber is trying to get away and they run out of gas, right? So they run out of gas, they get a flat tire or anything along those lines that's not on purpose, but it does stop them or slow them down from accomplishing their goal. All right, that's the difference between crisis and complication. Then you have the dark moment. The dark moment is the worst time for your protagonist. It's when it looks really bad. It's basically when the protagonist looks like they're about to die, or they're about to really lose out on trying to accomplish their goal. When it looks like it's the worst point of the protagonist's story. When it looks like this is the final moment where they could accomplish something, and if they don't make it here, it's over. Right? And so you have to distinguish that between all the different other minor dark moments where they're trying to accomplish a goal and they come into some different complications or crises. But the dark moment is the worst one. It's at the very top, usually towards the end of your story. After the dark moment, you need a solution, and that's called the enlightenment. The enlightenment is where the protagonist has now figured out, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to get out of my crisis. And the enlightenment doesn't have to be from the protagonist. Somebody else can come up with another solution. So if I'm tied up, right? I'm tied up. The bad guys have me tied up, and I need to escape. The point of enlightenment might be my friends are coming to rescue me, or the point of enlightenment might be, you know what? I can saw. I have a pocket knife in my back pocket, and I can use that to escape, type of thing. And that's the enlightenment, is just the solution. The climax is the story, is the part where we find out how they accomplish getting out of the situation. So the point of enlightenment is the sentence that's the answer to the problem, and the climax is how they got out of the situation. And then the denouement is what happens at the end. So after everything's all over, now you have the denouement, and that's the end. And now the end of that's the end of the story. All right. So two things real quick. How do you tell the difference between who the protagonist is and who the antagonist is? Too many times you've been taught that the protagonist is usually the main star, the main person in your story, and the antagonist is the person against the bad guy. That's not the case. You can't decide who the protagonist is based on who's the main character, or who the name on the movie billboard is, or the story, or whatever. The protagonist and the antagonist, this is how you determine it. Protagonist is the person who has a major change of heart by the end of the story. They think differently, a big thinking differently from the beginning to the end. And the antagonist stays the same. They think the same thing from beginning to the end. Now that's usually the bad guy who's the antagonist, and the good guy is the protagonist. So what that means is, if I believe that everybody's going to fail the class, right? I believe so. That's one of my That's my thinking. From the beginning of the class to the end of the class, I believe everybody's going to fail. But as we go through the class, and I learn, oh, you know what? Maybe not everybody's going to fail. I am the protagonist because I'm thinking differently from where I was at the beginning. Now, the antagonist would be, let's say you as a student are the antagonist and I'm the protagonist. I'm believing that everybody's going to fail, and you're believing as a student that everybody's going to get straight A's. And you believe that from the beginning to the end. And so antagonists say everybody's going to get straight A's, and they believe that all the way through. And the protagonist is believing, you know what, everybody's going to fail. And then something happens like, oh, you know what, people aren't failing. And now I believe that's one of the same, maybe there's something, the same thing that the antagonist believes or something different. But I believe differently from what I believed at the beginning of the story. That's the difference between a protagonist and an antagonist. All right. You guys got a few hours to get me some extra credit. And I don't know why you all didn't ask for this before, but there it is. And I hope it works out. All right. Peace, y'all.